there used to be compliments that were very common, that she is so well read, or he is such a great conversationalist. Really, it meant they were exposed to all kinds of different ideas that made them interesting. Today, it's not as common to tell someone that. But through podcast interviews, you can be exposed to new ideas, new people, new things to make your life more interesting and to make you more fun at parties. Now, today, Chloe and Claudia from our team are going to talk about this. And why this is important to podcast guests is often I will tell people, listen to an episode or two of the show before you're a guest. And often they'll pick things that they like or they want or are interested in. And I encourage you, find some things that you aren't interested in, right? A viewpoint that you don't agree with. In 30 or 45 minutes, you can know more about that aspect than probably 80% of the people out there. It'll make you interesting, it'll make you fun at parties, and it'll also make you prepared for your interview.
Thanks so much, Tom. Today, we are thrilled to welcome Claudia, an integral part of the Interview Valet team and an avid podcast enthusiast. Claudia's role involves connecting hosts and guests, but her love for podcasting extends far beyond her work. With an insatiable appetite for learning, Claudia regularly immerses herself in podcasts, gaining insights across a variety of topics. Her diverse learning habits have transformed her into a captivating conversationalist, armed with knowledge spanning various industries and interests. In today's episode, we'll dive into Claudia's podcasting background, exploring how her passion for the medium has enriched her life and broadened her horizons. Get ready to be inspired and entertained as we uncover Claudia's unique perspective on the podcasting world. Hi, Claudia. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Hello, Chloe. How are you?
I'm awesome. I'm so excited we're finally doing this. I've been waiting to get on one of these with you. I know we're going to have a great time. So, you have mentioned before that working in podcasts has made you more interesting at parties. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Well, even before coming into this role here, I had branched into podcasting because my husband, but then boyfriend at the time, was super interested in Radio Lab. And I was like, okay, this is just talk radio. Like, what are you talking about? Why is this cool? But of course, I wanted to learn more because you learn your partner's habits and what they're doing. And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, this is talk radio, but I'm much older than I was when I was stuck in the car with my mom listening to talk radio. So fell into Radio Lab. And then, of course, after Radio Lab, it was lots of other little nonfiction things. And then I dove into audio dramas and I was like, oh, this is just an audiobook in a podcasting form. And I was like, this is really neat because audiobooks sometimes can be troublesome for me because I have like an audio processing disorder. So I was able to start learning how to listen. And as a former teacher, I was at that point teaching middle school. I was like, no wonder my kids get so stuck sometimes through just a medium of just audio, or how some kids thrive through just audio. So, as I started listening to more podcasts and finding more topics, I was able to not only learn about our own learning and listening habits, but I was able to start finding things that I hadn't found before. If my students had mentioned they really loved a different video game, I was like, okay, I am not going to sit and play this game, but let me see if I can find something real quick that I can put on and listen to while I'm driving to work or as I'm doing the dishes. And now I can talk to them about it. I can connect with my students. Because at one point I was teaching 17-year-olds who were in 7th grade. So finding anything to connect with the kids to make them know that they're heard, they're listened, they're respected is so important. So I wanted to do that. And then of course you find your own stuff. I listen to a lot, I learn a lot, but there's not always the time to pick up a book or read a BBC article or read the local news. You don't always have time, but you can kind of find time to throw on a podcast while you're doing something else. And as you said, broaden horizons and think outside yourself for a little bit.
I love that you mentioned Radio Lab because I also attribute my love for podcasts back to listening to All Things Considered on NPR with my mom. That horn theme is the soundtrack to my childhood. So I also was very interested in the talk. And I like that it can serve as kind of like a verbal annotation source, if you will. Like I like about anytime I've ever read something growing up, I had to know what other people thought of it. Like I was able to form my own opinions, but I have to know what other people in podcasting is a really good way to dive into that. So how have they broadened your knowledge, podcasts? How have they broadened your knowledge and made you more interesting to engage with in conversations?
I know that people are getting a lot more of their information directly from their phone, which is curated through a TikTok algorithm or a Facebook algorithm or whatever news is being pushed to you based on the settings that you have put on your phone for most of the time. Because not as many people are turning on just the news to watch it scroll through the 24-hour news cycle. So I know now that I need to, or I've started just flagging a lot of different things that I wouldn't normally listen to. And I've started going, okay, let me dive into history. History was never my strong point. I taught math and science. Going into history was not always my thing, but I'm like, ooh, there's so much going on now that ties into history, or people start to quote things. And as you're talking about things that can potentially get a little more political when you're out with family or friends, and you're able to pull it away from the here and now and be able to talk about, oh, well, I listened to such and such on this podcast and I learned that, oh, well, actually, something that came through with our founding fathers, they were all like in their 20s. So how would you think if your son who's 25 is now helping write our new Bill of Rights, our Constitution? How do you feel? And talking more about those topics and maybe taking it off some of the more tempered political side of things. You can talk to more people and engage with more audiences without people getting upset or angry, and have really good discourse about what's going on, and then bring it up to something funny. How you found out that there was an audio drama podcast that's set in the American Revolution. And I know there was a kids one I used to listen to when my bonus son was young, and it was actually Benjamin Franklin as a kid and getting into all the trouble that he was in. And then you can turn it around to something more fun and exciting. And also that there really is, I think there was a ad, it might have been a Super Bowl ad, where the guy was like, oh, there's a podcast about that, there's a podcast about that. It's true, there is a podcast about how to train your cat how to sit or anything. So the more you listen, the more you learn, and the more interesting you can be, because the more people you can talk to. You don't have to talk to one person that you already connect with. You can talk to someone new about a topic that they're interested in.
So, are there any specific podcasts or even specific episodes on podcasts that have had a significant impact on your expanding knowledge? What's a good source of information for you that you find yourself going back to?
Oh gosh.
I know there are so many, but what you got?
Yeah, so many. I will say, like, starting with Radio Lab, because it it, it started allowing me to see that podcasts are rooted in actual science or actual knowledge, actual like information you could cite on an academic paper. And for some people, they're like, podcasting are just people talking in their basement. And it's like, no, 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 it's really not. You have college educated professors, you have people who have spent their entire life dedicated to their field of study, or someone who has made their entire job to educate others. And they're on these podcasts and they're doing it for free. You don't have things that are locked behind a paywall right now. Like, you're not having to go to college or pay for a course. You can turn on a podcast. And so Radiolab started it, but lately I've enjoyed some of the more fun, like, I love listening to Ologies by Allie Ward, because I'm like, what do I want to learn about? Ooh, there's bugs. Let me learn about some bugs today because this sounds fun. Oh, mushrooms? Okay, let's listen about mushrooms. Or, and you get to hear these people that are just getting to gush about the thing that they love, that they're passionate about, that then you can go, I didn't even realize that there was a job that allowed me just to talk about and learn about fish. Oh, fish. This is cool. And ologies, lately I've been listening to, it's a newer one, it's Too Complicated for History. And so it's talking about the very beginning of like how we're forming, like, what is an American? And like, even if you get that question, you're like, oh gosh, that seems almost loaded. Like, what? And so they start back from the beginning, like I was saying about like the American Revolution, and then even just the start of us as a colonies, and what are we doing, and why is it too complicated for history, and what's going on with that. And then as you listen to these people that are on, you're like, oh, you're on an episode over here. I want to listen to that. I want to find this. And those right now are kind of in my circle of put them on.
Great answers. For listeners, I would also recommend You're Wrong About by Sarah Marshall. Amazing podcast where she kind of dissects major misunderstandings of any historical things. I was mostly fascinated. She did a very long series, like a very, very deep dive of the OJ Simpson trial, everything leading up to before it even happened. I was on pins and needles for 6 months while she was uncovering that. So anything by Sarah Marshall. Michael Hobbs is also one I would urge anyone to look into. So about podcasts specifically, what about the information learned from podcasts differs from other forms of media? So like you said, you brought up a 24-hour news cycle earlier. How would podcasts differ from gaining information from them versus a news cycle, even a newspaper, if we're going old school?
I would say that with our national reading level is about third, fourth grade, that being able to pick up a novel or a book or a news article can sometimes feel daunting for people who struggle with reading. Because if you talk to adults, a lot of adults that you speak to might not have picked up an actual book since high school when they were forced to read. And as also a former children's librarian and being within the public, I've realized that there's a lot of people who don't like to pick up something they have to physically read because it's daunting, it's scary, it's intimidating. But people love to talk. People love to listen to people talk. So if you're able to get someone to go, hey, this is an author I really like, you might not want to commit to a 10 to 14-hour audiobook that they've written, but here's a 1 hour interview that they get to talk about the book and what they've done. And I think it's something that would really help you or benefit you. So, this is why I'm concerned about this part of our landscape right now, politically or for our country or what's going on. This person really puts it in cool words that I think you can relate to. So here's an hour of an interview to listen to. And it brings it to people instead of people having to go to it when it comes to knowledge. Because, like, the news came into our house, it comes into our mailboxes. Whereas for podcasts, you can go to it and find something that you can relate to the host, that you can find something that you're able to get the information in a way that feels personable, relatable, and also that you can understand better than maybe trying to understand the written word.
I love that because most people they don't want to do the work of finding it. Just like you said, it's kind of I reviewed this so you don't have to, and that sentence alone is a very big pull for a lot of online content. So that makes a lot of sense. So Claudia, other than the sparkling conversation we're having right now, can you share any memorable conversations or insights you've gained from discussing podcast topics with others? Have you ever successfully turned someone on to podcasts?
I will think about talking to my husband's uncle. So, and he always into banking. He just recently retired and he's just kind of like, what do I do? I've been doing banking for so long. Very, very high, like really knowledgeable person. Normally not someone I can talk to about a lot because he's a big baseball fan and he's from Boston and banking. And I'm like, none of those things are things I can talk to you about. I'm so sorry. I'm not a Red Sox fan. I don't do that. Okay. But then he started mentioning Bitcoin and NFTs, and I was like, ooh, actually, let's talk. And I was able to sit there and at least have a baseline conversation with him because he also was like, I don't really know this. That's outside of my realm because being traditional in the banking sphere and investing, it was something he didn't want to learn about, and I totally understand. But it was something that I was then able to sit and talk to him, and he was like, oh, okay, maybe the stuff you do is legitimate, like this is cool. And I then asked for a list of podcasts or people to listen to, and I was like, yeah, let me look up a few things to like tell you. And he was like, oh, okay, I'm going to listen this way instead of try to read it. Cause he was like, I can't understand it when I read it. I was like, well, maybe if you listen to it and have someone discuss it, you'll at least understand it a little bit more. So I remember that was one of them. He just kind of looked at me like, oh, okay, you, this is something legitimate. And then of course it's kind of just nosedive from there. And it's just, or not nosedive, it's a snowball. There we go. That's the right word. Into something more. Cause then he's like, well, what else have you been listening to? What have you learned now? Like, what is something else? Cause now that he's in retirement, he's like, I want to learn more things. I want to do things, but he wants to do it while he's grilling out or drinking a beer by the pool. Like, what can I listen to that can give me something else to do? Yeah.
I love when people want to learn. So going back, you had mentioned that the reading level in America is not the best. It's not news to anyone that there is an ongoing literacy crisis in America. And a part of that, it's not just straight up reading, there's comprehension, there's discernment, there's critical thinking. Do you find that listening to podcasts has influenced your ability to engage in critical thinking, to make you sharper now that you're not actively in school anymore?
I would say so, because I know that when you get out of school or when you get out of the educational sphere, you're not always pausing to think or pausing to think critically. When you're in school or when you're working with an education, you're always kind of almost forced to stop and like think about the focus questions or write about this, read and respond, read and pause. As an adult, if we are reading, we're normally reading something that we already want to read. It's something that we've gone to and we've found. So we might not be thinking critically about it other than, oh, I really don't like how this author wrote this book. I'm mad at this author, but maybe not reading something that's tough or difficult. And there's a lot of topics out there that are difficult to talk about. I mean, just our own history as a country, what's currently happening. I was listening to one about George Washington's house and how like he did have slaves on the property, and like that doesn't necessarily take away from him as a person, but because it was the time, we can still really respect him for who he was and what he did. But like, yeah, it's not everyone's perfect in everything they did, and that we have to take it through a historical lens. So by being able to listen to podcasts that might touch on something a little harder to maybe read or write about, it allows you to continue to pause to listen. And I think that's helpful when you're having conversations with people, that you're actually listening to them and not listening to respond, but listening to understand. And when you listen to a podcast, you're not listening to respond, because you're not trying to have an answer or have a comeback or have a thought to add to the conversation. You're just listening to understand or to form your own ideas about what is being presented to you, which I think gets lost once we leave a classroom environment or something along those lines, because listening to understand is hard. Listening to respond is easy. It's what we do all the time.
And especially if there's any ounce of nuance to anything that you're trying to understand, you really have to tap into critical thinking to get past that. And I feel podcasting kind of offers a good opportunity for that, as long as you, again, are listening to understand. So do you believe that people who guest on podcasts, people who make a move out of podcast guesting, would they benefit from exploring and listening to more podcasts, even ones outside of the kind of genre or industry that they're looking to speak in themselves?
I do think so. One, to think about how you speak, because some people, again, they're only talking to a group of people that either already like them, already agree with them, already understand the way they speak. So it's easy to continue those conversations. So if you're only going on podcast and you're only talking like you're talking to people who know you, you're not going to explain yourself potentially well enough. And so if you're listening to enough podcasts, you start to realize that people are going to pause. They're going to restate something that they might have already said 10 minutes prior, but they're going to restate it in another way. They're going to explain it a little bit better. And they're also not just using their own little bits of language, but they're matching how the host is speaking, because the host knows their audience and what they're looking to hear or how they listen. And so by listening to more people talk on various topics, you're like, oh, okay, right. I need to make sure to slow down when I speak. Or I realize that my vocabulary is much broader than some other podcasts. So maybe I need to bring myself down, or maybe I need to ramp myself up and I need to use words that are not just good and better and you can adjust how you speak in a way that works while still being authentic to yourself, but remembering that you're not talking just into a microphone and hoping someone will hear. You're trying to engage in an authentic conversation that allows people to go, ooh, I do connect with you. I want to be there and I want to meet you where you are, so you don't have to broadcast into my home. Like, I want to meet you in the middle and I want to find you.
Yeah. I think was it Bill Nye that said every person you've ever met knows something that you don't. So there's always something to be learned. So looking ahead, how do you envision the role of podcasts in fostering that sort of intellectual curiosity and promoting lifelong? Because like you said, podcasts tend to work because people have done the research for it. But if you're not looking for what's out there, you're not going to be able to find it. So how can podcasts help in that?
I'm trying to think about who I was just actually listening to on another podcast, and I loved what he was doing. It's the Humanity Archives with, I think it's Jermaine Fowler. And he was talking about how, one, history it's a human experience. We all experience, but we're all going to experience different. Like in the episode I was listening to, because he was a guest on Too Complicated for History, and they were doing a crossover because he does the Humanity Archive. He just wrote a book, and then he has his own podcast series, and he's trying to put it all on the web as well. So not only is it that he's putting the work out there in an audio format, but he's also putting it into a written format so you can use it. And he wrote his book. And I do see some of that, I think, going in that direction in a lot of different ways. Because we've had YouTube for years that it's like, oh, you need to learn something, go to YouTube. You can find out how to sew a pattern or fix your car or any of those. Now we can start bringing podcasting and maybe our long list of like archived works out into the world, and being able to bring academic journals to the people. Because one of the biggest downfalls of academic journals, in my mind, is the fact that you have to pay to read them, or you have to be a college student. I understand that people who are trying to get money and grants and make their name, like, they need to have the academic journals, but it's up against a paywall. And so the everyday person can't access it. So how does that help people broaden their knowledge if they're stuck behind a paywall? Of course, going to your local library helps. And I'm always going to plug the library because they will also bring you that information, but you have to know how to find it. So I think with how expensive college education is going in our country, and more people choosing to, yes, learn trade or not go to higher education, that I think podcasts are going to be a way to bridge that gap, that they're going to be able to bring more of that academic learning to people and let them learn at their own pace. Let's find a section of history or a section of science I've never really liked, and I'm now going to listen to it. And then at the end of that episode, I know I can go to their website and they're going to have a list of resources for me to now look at. I have YouTube videos to watch. I have websites to look at. I have people to connect with that are going to connect with me on LinkedIn because I want to follow what they do, or follow them on Instagram. And and it becomes more of a community instead of just some person on a PBS documentary that you can't connect with. The academic level is the same as what you would find on like a PBS documentary within these podcasts, but you can now personally connect with them on Twitter. They might not respond to your DM, but there's way more of a chance that you're going to be able to connect and build a community in a way through podcasting than you could in other formats.
I love that. We are in a community crisis, I would say, similar to the literacy crisis. It's hyper individualism is doing quite a number on us as people, and I do like that, and the accessibility too. I never really thought about it that way, but you're right. JSTOR, it makes it hard. But if we have podcasts, there's a lot more information out there that otherwise we wouldn't have. So I do love that.
Yeah, and academic journals are hard to read. Even as someone with a master's degree, I'm sitting here going, oh gosh, I'm going to have to look up some of these words, and just the writing style is half the time I'm like, I have reread that paragraph 3 times.
Oh, you'll read the abstract and it'd be like, I can't even tell what it means from just this. What am I supposed to do with the rest of it? Oh yeah, and a podcast can bridge that gap. I think that's very insightful. So, Claudia, just for fun, if you had the opportunity to create a podcast episode or even an entire series, I'm not putting any limits on you here, exploring a completely off the wall, random niche topic just for fun, what would it be?
Oh gosh.
I know that's a loaded question for someone like you, but
yeah, I was like, okay, which of my interests would I? Because I've done a D&D podcast ish. We did some with my bonus son and my husband, and really it was a way to get him to like engage in, theater of the mind and learning how to like take written language or things that are only in your head and do
learning to advocate in a way too for yourself with that theater of the mind. Yeah, for sure.
and communicate. Just
Absolutely.
because you have to get your thoughts out in a way that other people can understand. But I think it would be if you could have enough people who wanted to be their favorite, like interview their favorite book character, or have like reenactors instead of reenactors for the history people. It's like someone who could be that book character, like fully embody it, and then you could interview them. I think it would be a fun, creative way. And there's probably something similar out there because, like I said, there's already something. But if you were able to interview your favorite book character and, of course, have like the author go, yes, this is perfect. This is exactly how I envision them. Yes, let's go. Because I mean, things pop up on Book Talk all the time. They're like, oh, wow, this person fully embodies my favorite character. But also you have people who have varying ideas about what their favorite character looks like or speaks like or behaves like, even though everyone's read the same book. But I think that would be a fun way. That would just be fun, low stakes.
Oh yeah,
because you can just have fun with it.
Yeah, that would be nothing but fun. So on the topic of that, let's have fun here again. Who is a fictional character from a movie, TV show, or book, no limitations once again, that you could see starting their own podcast with whatever topic? What do you think?
Oh gosh.
My initial thought is Randy Meeks from the Scream franchise, Jamie Kennedy's character. He would have a review show of any horror movie that would come out, and I would absolutely listen to it.
I'm trying to think of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the alien guy that comes and grabs Arthur Dent.
Oh, okay.
I think that guy who was like, don't forget your towel.
Yes.
I think he would have so much fun finding random people,
yes,
interviewing them about their life and everyday things, and not necessarily like anything intense or insane. Just like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
What's going on? Like, it would be
very investigative journalism.
Yeah.
Yes. That's a great answer. And on that same vein, I also think Fox Mulder from the X-Files would have a podcast. Absolutely. Without question. I'm actually surprised that wasn't my first answer now that I'm thinking about it.
Oh, yeah. Well, then if you think about even the same type of thoughts with like the Doctor from Doctor Who.
Yes.
Because I know in some of the episodes, I think someone had like a video blog or vlog, because it was before podcasting got really big, that they were like, oh, where have we seen the Doctor lately? Where have we seen alien technology? What are we going to do? And always like trying to search and find within that. And it's, I think of more podcasting, especially host, as everyday people that are interviewing something they really love. So when I think of host, I think more of maybe the side characters in a book that have experienced something that changed them, and now they're wanting to continue down the rabbit hole of what they found, and how does it connect with this crazy experience that they got to live by knowing the main character of a story. So it would be like a side hobbit. Like none of the other hobbits, they were just like, okay, so this really tall guy showed up in the Shire and then left, and then they came back, and like all these things happened, but now I want to like find out what's out there.
I
Like
love
how can
that.
I get them to come in?
Absolutely, like a bystander's guide to what actually happened at the Shire. I love that so much.
Yeah.
All right, Claudia. Well, as we wrap up, I have a lot to think about from everything you've gave us. You are so smart. Everyone who listens can obviously pick up on that, and very insightful. And I want to thank you so much for sharing your insights and your background with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Chloe. It's always great to talk to someone else who appreciates learning and listening and getting information out there for everyone so that we can all continue to better ourselves through whatever medium that works best for us. And hopefully podcasting can continue to bridge that gap for so many people.
So there you have it. If you are a podcast guest, you should be a podcast listener also, not only to learn new things, to get a sense of the show, but also see what other guests do that you could work into your appearance on podcasts. It's one of the things that I love. I listen to a first interview from all of our clients, and that gives me a chance to be exposed to a lot of different ideas, a lot of different podcasts. And I always say afterwards, what's ordinary to them is amazing to others.